Hi, everyone. Welcome to Scribbles from the Basement number 2. Last time I looked at complexity in the external environment and what it means for organizations. Now I'm going to go inside our mind and I'm going to look at complexity and how it works out in the hemispheres of the brain. Okay, so in our last discussion, we talked about how there was a kind of a chasm, if you recall. We talked about this complexity chasm that sits between the left side, where we can have a world that's simple or complex, or the right side where simple or complicated, or the right side where we can have something that's complex or chaotic, right? So, and what we said was both those sides are quite different. And as we started to think about what it is we do on the left-hand side, we're really trying to exploit, I'm talking about business now, we're trying to exploit an existing business model. And the best way to exploit things and to open up your kind of cost structure versus your profit margin, and what we're trying to do there is open the jaws of profitability, is we use the hierarchy, right? And we focus on efficiency, and we have control, and we have orders. It's very structured, right? Whereas on the other side, what we're trying to do is we're trying to explore. So we're trying to explore what the next S curve of growth is going to be, right? So companies run on S curves, and when you get up to the top of a particular S curve and you're not really able to get any more margin, you have to take what we call here an abductive leap of faith to get onto the next new pasture for growth. And that's an explore type of opportunity. And in an explore type opportunity, it's not really a hierarchy that works, it's a network. And it's a network which today in the business world tends to be called also an ecosystem, where you could have some component of your business, but then you could also be partnering with the next layer out and so on and so forth. And so it's a different kind of environment, and it's a different kind of model. And there, what you're trying to do is you're really trying to look for not efficiency, but opportunity. And that comes not from control, but from collaboration. And that doesn't come from order, but it comes from patterns. And so what we have here, if you think about it, is we have two completely different operating systems. John Cotter calls this a dual operating system, right? Over here, you have the hierarchy, and that is all about control and execution. And over here, you have a network, which is all about collaboration and co-creation. Now, just as we talked about up here, if you are in this environment and you determine that this is the environment you're in, well, this particular operating model will not work to execute in that environment. And similarly, if you are in this environment, similarly, this operating model will not work, right? So how we set up our firm and how we organize it needs to be aligned and congruent with the operating environment we find ourselves in, right? And so then it comes down to leadership. So last time I kind of drew two eyes here, and essentially the eyes are the eyes of the leader. And if you think about it, the leaders need to essentially do three things differently on one side or the other. They need to perceive, sense make, and choreograph differently depending on which side they're on, right? So if you are on the left-hand side, leaders need to reframe what they see through a model, right? Or frame what they see through kind of a model of control. Whereas if they're on the right-hand side, they need to reframe what they see through a model of patterns, right? If they're trying to make sense of things, they have to rewire what they think about kind of cause and effect over here and progression paths over here. If they want to think about how to choreograph, they're going to choreograph through linear control and hierarchy over here, and they're going to choreograph through progression paths over here. So there is a dichotomy, if you will, a yin and yang in what the brain has to do to perceive, sense, make, and choreograph. And that's where I get to this notion of the leader, right? If I can make this into kind of a face here. And now let's get into their brain. So you have the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere, if you're familiar with Ian McGilchrist, he wrote a book called Master and Emissary. Essentially, what his argument is that the left hemisphere is the hemisphere that breaks everything down. It abstracts. It's fixed. It sees parts, right? It's static. And it processes the world that way. So if somebody loses their right hemisphere, they tend to be very, very linear in their thinking, and they're not expansive. They don't see content. This is all about content, not context. Now, the right hemisphere is very different. The right hemisphere is all about context, and it is about embodied. It's about situations, right? And so essentially, the corpus callosum that sits between our left and our right hemisphere acts as a kind of a traffic cop, if you will. It acts as a traffic cop to kind of say which side should be operating at what point in time, you know? And so if I encounter a particular situation, should I be perceiving everything from a gestalt or from the context, or should I be breaking it down into the things that need to get solved? And so McGilchrist makes the argument that by and large, just like we had a teeter-totter last time, where we said that the external environment, the teeter-totter, tends to be focusing a lot more on this complex side. If we think about science and the human brain, this is the world perhaps of science. This is the world of art. What we're finding is in the world here, we have a little bit more of a teeter-totter going this way, right, in terms of how we think and process. So what we've got here is a little bit of a challenge, right? When we're faced with a challenge, our mind tends to want to go to the control side, keep calm, carry on, take control, figure it out, right? Or find out the right answer and execute against it. Well, this is a problem because our natural proclivity as human beings is to kind of head in this direction, but we've already established that the world we're operating in is a complex one, right? So what we have is it's human nature for us to go into the left hemisphere and trying to start to break the problem down, when in fact the problem may be more complex and it might require a little bit more of the right brain. So the big challenge for leaders is, when faced with new challenges, right, is to not fall into the trap of going right brain and starting to plan, particularly if it's a complex environment, but instead starting to explore the patterns. And this is a very, very, very hard thing to do because our proclivity is towards the left. So what do we talk about here? We talked about the two primary operating contexts that have a chasm in between it. Over in simple and complex, what we're trying to do is we're trying to exploit an existing business model to maximize profitability. That works well through a hierarchy. If we're trying to explore to find a new opportunity, we tend to work through networks of relationships within and outside the organization. And if we're going to have leaders, these leaders right here, perceive, sense, make, and choreograph, it's almost like they have to perceive, sense, make, and choreograph in a very different way over here. PSC1 is very different than PSC2. But our tendency when we're placed under challenge is to, by and large, most of the time, left hemisphere tends to go to PSC1. We tend to want to break things down, abstract them away, break them down into their parts, create a Gantt chart and get things done. Now, that doesn't mean that that's not useful. It's very useful if we know what it is we need to do. It's not useful if we're trying to figure out where we need to go next, right? So in a find it out world, as I talked about before, where there's a known answer, we can plan and execute against the answer. In a figure it out world, where we don't know yet where we're going and we're not sure what the next progression path is for us to jump to, we need to tap into our right brain a whole lot more. So I hope that made sense. That was Scribbles number 2.